while he was on me like this, and it was fully loaded. So then I put it up and I fired off a shot, and it had no effect whatsoever. He merely sunk his teeth in deeper. So then I thought, well, I've got to do something, otherwise he's going to kill me. So I put the revolver over my head like that, and I shot him. He immediately let me go and went off and crouched about 20 feet away, looking a bit startled. So then I thought, well, I better get down to the Land Rover, which is at the bottom of the hill, as soon as possible, before I started feeling too groggy to drive it. So I made my way down to the Land Rover and drove to camp. That evening, Sheba arrived alone, and I felt very worried about Suleiman, because not turning up, because I thought maybe he's badly injured. But in the morning, he arrived, and he seemed to be perfectly all right. Mercifully, the bullet had gone across the top of his shoulder, and I could see it lodged under the skin on the other side, and he was almost all right. And also, he was perfectly friendly.
Did you never have any more trouble with him, George?
No. And then he came to a rather sad end. He and his sister attacked a full-grown hippo, and there was a tremendous battle, and the hippo must have got Suleiman up against the trunk of a big acacia tree, and he bitten right through the body. I found him dead.
George Adamson settled in Kora in 1972, hoping it would be a last refuge for both himself and his lions. He no longer liked to shoot. His interest now was in conservation.
I'd always liked to be in a place where there's the wildlife and not too many people. When I first came here, there were plenty of rhino, and I reckon that there must be something over 150 rhino in this area. And today, of course, there's not one left. An elephant in the dry season like it is now, I would say that there'd probably be somewhere in the region of 500 elephants. And now, I doubt whether there's maybe 40.
Poaching, not for meat but for profit, is wiping out the big game of East Africa, and Kora is no exception. The Tana River, which forms the northern border of the reserve, is the source of all life in the region, both for these Somali herdsmen and for George's camp. As the founder of Kora and an honorary game warden, George Adamson watches over the reserve with devotion and concern, anxious about the poaching threat to its dwindling herd of elephants and the pressure from Somali herds which could turn Kora into a desert. George has had a lot of distinguished guests over the years, from princes to film stars, and today's visitor is a very important one, both to him and to Kora, the Director of Wildlife in Kenya, Dr. Perez Olindo.
I'm glad to see you, Judge. How have you been?
Oh, all right, fine.
We sent some lion cubs to you.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. You must come and see them.
I didn't know whether you wanted them or not.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
No, I'm most grateful.
Yes,
They're coming on fine.
Very good.
Really nice country.
Dr. Olindo has come because 3 of his African rangers were shot dead by a gang of heavily armed Somali poachers known as Shifter.
Well, this year has been really bad, you know, because of all the shift activity. And no one really knows how many elephants have been shot. There was, about a month ago, there were 2 shot within about half a mile of here.
Of this airstrip?
Yeah.
I see.
Can't car.
Honestly, it has to take a beast of a man to do something like this.
As far as I'm concerned, I think that the life of one elephant is worth probably the lives of at least 100 humans. It should be a capital offence for anyone to shoot an elephant.
Absolutely terrible. So over the past year, about how many elephants do you think have been killed in Kora?
I should say in the year, I'd say at least 30, certainly not less than 30.
30?
I should think so, yeah.
Yes.
For the first time, there's been an outcry about poaching, with allegations of indifference and corruption in high places.
You see, there has been a lot of public debate in the country, and some people have even gone to the extent of saying that we pay lip service to conservation in this country. In this very area, Kora Game Reserve, 3 of my rangers were gunned down dead by armed bandits. When you are fighting an enemy, you should not see the government in terms of rangers and police or other security forces. We have joined ranks and we are working together.
Despite Dr. Lindo's optimism, it's doubtful if Kenya has the will or the resources to defeat poaching, which now seriously threaten its greatest asset, its wildlife.
Maybe you can call them out. How old were they when they came in?
I think they were not much over a week old.
They were very young.
Yeah.
Look at that one.
There's a lioness who's a grandmother, and I think she might adopt these cubs.
You think so?
Yes, probably when they're about 2-3 months older. We can see how they react.
And how far is that older lion?
Well, at the moment she's about 12 miles up the river, but I'm hoping that she'll come back. She usually does.
See, for us in Kenya, the name of George Adamson is synonymous with Kora. I think he's one person who has made the greatest contribution to wildlife in this country, not only in Kora, in other parts of the country. And since he retired from the government, George has continued to associate personally, selflessly, with the cause of conservation in Kenya.
The nearest village to George's camp is 30 miles downriver, just outside the reserve. George makes regular visits to find out what the shifter are up to and to buy camel meat for his lions. As a Mzee, or distinguished elder citizen, Bwana George always gets a big welcome. His friend Kora is George's main source of information about the Somalis, and particularly about the movement of the shifter gangs. When he was a game warden responsible for a vast area, George relied on a network of informers to keep poaching under control. He used to get a government allowance to pay them, but that's no longer done, he says, so the system no longer works. Kora tells him that a gang of shifter has been moving up from the coast towards Kora, using, as they always do, the ordinary Somali herdsmen with their flocks of sheep and goats as cover. These gangs are ruthless and terrorize the villages. On the way back to camp in the Land Rover, we saw a plume of smoke in the distance. Something was on fire in the reserve near the river where the vegetation is richest. George immediately became concerned. In a fragile ecosystem like Kora's, where the survival of the game is now on a knife edge, a fire can cause enormous damage. The first clue, a few Somali goats. Then, if there are Somali poachers ahead, he knows they'll be armed. George was convinced the fire had been started deliberately.
Who's caused this then, George? What, the people with the herds, with the goats?
Yeah. If they go on doing this sort of thing, then eventually they'll ruin the riverine forest.
And the herds? I mean, the goats and the sheep?
Well, they're so stupid. I mean,
but I mean, it seems to me they're eating it down and then setting it on fire, and very soon you're not going to have a reserve left if it's allowed to go on.
damn stupid, eh? It's typical Somali destruction. Their own country they've turned into a desert, and they'd do the same here if they're given the opportunity.
George says the Somalis burn or cut down the dome palms because they believe they harbour the tsetse fly, which doesn't affect the game, but gives domestic livestock sleeping sickness. Through his tracker, George questioned two Somalis we found in the bush. They were unconcerned, arrogant even, when George demanded to know if they had started the fire.
George, what are they saying?
They say that they didn't set this fire, that they saw it like when they were bringing their stock through. They try and take their stock through to out of the reserve.
They know they're not supposed to be here.
Yeah. There won't be any Konachileo and a Toka for reserve or to Kamatra.
Although he was sure they were guilty, all he could do was to order them out of the reserve, frustrated at his powerlessness to halt the Somali invasion.
You get hordes of tribesmen with tens of thousands of head of livestock. There's no room for wildlife. Africa without its wildlife would be a very different and dull place. I always think, why shouldn't these creatures, they have just as much right to live and enjoy their lives as a human has.
We drove back to camp, concerned in case the lions had been frightened away by the presence of the Somalis.
You can't stop lions attacking domestic stock, particularly when they're surrounded by it. If they attack domestic stock, as they do and have done, there's a danger of them being poisoned or shot or speared or something like that. I know some of my lions have been poisoned. Come on, go! Come on, go!
George, is it true that when you've been away, the lions come back when you come back?
Well, it's happened so often that I think it must be so. Again and again, when I've been away, the lions hadn't been seen around here for some time, and I arrived here, and that evening they turned up. I've got no explanation for it, except that they have senses which we lost. Come on, old girl. Here, come on, here.
Despite the latest Somali scare, George was relieved to find all the pride there under the leadership of his old friend Grow.
Here, look. Come on, look.
That night, for the very first time, one of the young lions walked over to the compound to inspect the cubs. They were a bit nervous at first, but soon got their nerve back.
Come on, look what you've got.
George hopes that when they and the pride have become used to one another, Grow will adopt them. In this way, their release to the wild will have been as natural as possible. George knows that Kora, its lions, and the rest of its wildlife are under threat, but he refuses to be pessimistic.
Mankind is probably the most destructive creature that's ever lived on the face of the earth. Look what we're doing to the world now. But I think that now people are waking up to the fact that if we go on like we are now, life's not going to be worth living. The quality of life is rapidly disappearing. And it doesn't matter how clever the human race may become, eventually nature will sort it out and restore the balance. I know probably a lot of people think I'm a crank, but I rejoice in being a crank.
Crank or not, George Adamson's ideal is that man and nature should live in harmony. Animals, he believes, have as much right to a place on Earth as we do. That is the ideal he bequeaths to us all.